I'll do my hand waving to bring us together. Jayden's up there helping me. Welcome everyone. Just before I bring up our guest artist today, I wanted to say thank you for coming. I'm Jacob Zimmer. I'm the artistic director of Nakai Theater. Thanks. I'll take it for documentation. Yeah, thank you very much for coming. This is amazing to be here on the territory of Kwanlundan and the Town Parking Council to have a conversation at the very beginning of what for Nakai is ideally a 3 or 4 year and ongoing project of thinking and working on what theater can be made at the scale of the landscape here, and what is possible in theater that can only be done here, and what can we make that can only be made here. And that's really our focus for the next while, and part of that involves the amazing landscape that is here. We've got some amazing guests. We've got 9 days, this is the beginning of 9 days of us working together. And I wanted to start it in part with 4 people who aren't participating in the whole 9 days, but all of whom have practices and artwork that relate to landscape in often different ways. So with that, I will invite Emily, Lianne, Matthew, and Jayden up to join me. Yeah, thank you guys all. We have more chairs. 2 more. Thank you, first of all of you for coming. We wanted to start just by way of introduction to ask each of you to speak a little bit to your practice of art making, whatever that is, and how it relates to landscape, and also maybe where the landscape that you first encountered. So I think of Keep Right In for me as a place where even in this thing of doing theater at the landscape, I'm like, oh, I'm just a kid who wanders around the forest, like making up stories with twigs. And that is now like has grown a little. So thinking about maybe what those first landscapes and if that impacts your work. We'll start here.
My name is Jayden Soroka. I work here in the space. My profession, I think, support of this project is within VR and digital kind of modeling and creation. So we're talking a lot about how can we look at space in terms of distance and understanding scale and perspective, even incorporating builds, models, elements, and whatever it turns out to be. So they asked me to be a part of it, which is really cool. I have no idea what I'm actually going to do, but no. And I think with nature, like I remember as a kid, I first took off on a plane, and I remember looking down. I was going to first flight ever was actually going to Disneyland as a little kid with my grandparents. I remember like flying over to LA, looking down over the mountains and just seeing topography for the first time, and just this idea of looking from above down like a map, a real map. And one of my biggest things in what I do, what I love in animation is photography. I've just fallen in love with it as a kid, and as an animator, I kind of came back to it later in life, and I really enjoy working with photography in space. So, yeah.
Hello, my name is Lianne Charlie. I'm Wolf Clan of the Takeisho Budan Big River people, the Little San Carmex First Nation. I was born here, and we left when I was 6, so this question of land that influences me is really interesting to think about. So as I was both listening to Jayden and thinking about what I'm going to say, we moved to Victoria, so I was remembering sort of feeling coastal air and the wind and being on the ferry and all those things, and then sort of thinking now about my art practice and what I do and how the land sort of is very much incorporated now. I think it's more through the lens of politics, the politics of this place, and the politics of being an Indigenous person living in colonized, in our homelands that are now colonized. And realizing that all spaces are political, all actions on the land are now political, and then everything that I create in response to that and working with that, so the art, the writing, anything, the teaching that I do, then also has this sort of, is politicized as well. Yeah, so I'm happy for the question, and I think there's actually lots more there, so I'm looking forward to hearing more about this.
You may not say everything that's possible to say, but it's shocking.
I apologize in advance, I'm pretty sick. My name is Emily Ross. I'm a musician and composer with Borealis. And that's something that I am doing in the summers right now full time, but I'm also a student full time. I go to music and I take political science and environmental studies. So in my work with Borealis has been very much inspired by the landscape of the Yukon specifically. Our aim is to communicate northern stories to different audiences with our art. And I was born and raised here, and so I do feel that both my personal music and my work with Borealis has been very impacted by the Yukon's landscape. I remember when I was younger, my favorite thing to do in kindergarten, they asked us to write our favorite thing, and I was like, I like to go look at views outside. And so I used to just go by myself into the woods and make up songs. And I think I've always been very awe-inspired by the North, and that has definitely translated into a lot of my creative endeavors.
I'm Matthew Lien, and I was born in San Diego, in California, which has always been a really big, big city. And when I was 5 years old, my father, who was an aerospace engineer, decided to quit his job as an aerospace engineer and buy a lodge, which was Desdiage Lodge, which is down on the Haines Road in the middle of Kluane National Park, off-grid, really, really remote. And so I started spending half a year with him in the summers and then going back to California. So that had a huge impact on the ferry system. I would fly to Seattle, it's like a bird, I'd fly to Seattle, take the ferry for 4 days up to Haines, which was just awesome, man. And symbolic, you pull in those days in Seattle. So you pull out of Seattle and you see that skyline fade. The next day is all out on the Sound, so it's just no land anywhere, like a cleansing, baptismal experience. And then you wake up on the next day and you're a stone's throw from these fjord-like shores, and then I'd be at Kluane National Park, this stunning, really mountainous, the highest mountains in Canada, more glacial activity than any non-polar region, more grizzly bears than anywhere else. It's a really wild and beautiful place. And then I'd go back to California. And the state flag in California, which flew at my elementary school, has the California brown bear, which was already extinct in 1922. So I would go from a place where when I went out to play, you had to be aware of bears, to a place where you had to be aware of bad guys, pretty much, because there were kidnappings and stuff, and your parents would warn you. And it was a whole different vibe to be afraid of bad people compared to good bears. And that, my parents, both of them were pretty environmentally active and culturally passionate. So that led to me being very, in the same vein. And in 1992, 93, the Yukon government was trying to start a wolf kill program, because the trophy hunters were now running the government, and so the outfitters were, and there was a big business for trophy hunting. So they thought if there's no wolves, there'd be a lot of moose and caribou to bring up people to shoot. No competition, right? And a lot of friends and I were fighting against that, but they went ahead with it. And when I first saw the photos of these, they would shoot them in the winter because they could see them, scare them out onto a lake. And then after they'd shoot them on the lake, they'd land their ski planes and take their skin, because it's worth something. And they'd leave these really brilliant red carcasses, skinless carcasses, lying there on the ice, on this white ice. And it, as a result of trying to fight that, and then that went ahead, and that led to an emotional response, which was musical, to an album called Bleeding Wolves, which went multi-platinum in Asia, but also led to my creating a project with friends called the Annual Wildlands Project. So we would pick what we felt was an endangered river every year, go on that river for a week or two, and create music. And that those songs often wound up on my albums. And that process of kind of being in wilderness, creating a soundtrack to what you're within, which is really fun and cool and an interesting perspective, and for the purpose of political action, essentially, and public inspiration, led to a lifelong kind of path in that genre.
And that's when we'll talk at various points
We'll
about
talk.
binaural recordings
Yes,
and spatialization, because I think this is some of the things that we're interested in thinking about and Leanne about, like the difference between work that ends up in gallery or in like formal settings, and then also the relationship, like I know you work a bit with mural work and working in community, and that sort of difference in how the conversation between land and gallery is. And I wonder if you could speak to that. And
That's actually really interesting. I have a few pieces at the Klondike Institute of Arts and Culture in Dawson City right now. They're sculptures, I guess. One of them's a life-size hot pink paper mache bull moose made out of the Umbrella Final Agreement, which is the framework that guides modern treaty making in the Yukon. The other is a paper hide on a frame, which is indicative of the moose hide tanning process, where you would take the epidermis off the hide, but the hide in my case is all the land claims maps collaged with a landscape image collaged on top, and then the third piece is a baby belt, which is a garment that we would use traditionally to carry our babies. So I made that one out of the Little Salmon Carmacks First Nation land claims map, and the Placer Mining Act, and some pictures of Faro Mine. And that was a personal piece. The other two were made with community folks. Anybody who wanted to join could. But that one was responding to an afterbirth ceremony that we did with my one-year-old baby last year, where we put the placenta out on the land in our traditional territories, which is something our ancestors would recognize us doing. And then I learned later that when we put the placenta, because of the land claims process, the subsurface rights belong to the Crown, so they can essentially mine that area because the land claims has facilitated state and industry access into our territories. So this place of land is central, but the interesting thing that I just went to Dawson about a month ago, I guess. I hadn't seen the exhibit there. I'd only seen it when I was here at the Yukon Art Center. And there was something about it being in that gallery space, these things that are so deeply rooted to the land, and the physical landscape, but also the politics of the land, and then to see them in the gallery, but also I went to teach with them to do some workshops, land claims workshops, using them as teaching tools. And I wanted community folks, like First Nations people, to come. And I don't know for sure, but I'm sitting with this tension between accessibility of something that's for them and for us, but is only accessed and was only accessed by folks who are there out of interest. And I don't really know what to make of that, so I'm writing a dissertation about it.
We'll solve it. And Jayden, you're like some of the work that you've been doing around the sort of VR work in sort of rural spaces where we are shrinking a landscape into a very small space, while also like blowing up a very small space into something very big. What have you sort of noticed because I know you've been doing some recording inland with sort of the 360 virtual, immersive digital.
So it's all brand new.
It's all brand new. We don't know what to call it.
Yeah, exactly.
But what in terms of, I guess, perspective or scale do you notice in changing between those frames? Yeah, just, one or two.
I don't know. Good question. I think part of it is we're in a place right now where it's we're at the infancy of the technology. So what we're talking about in terms of what we want to create today is one thing, tomorrow it's a completely different thing. So right now within the technology, and obviously there's a lot of artistry within it, but right now we're dealing with just, we have to basically limit our creativity within technology, which is probably the issue right now we're having with just using this new way of immersing ourselves into space. So yeah, what we're talking about is, so a good example of this is, if we're going to take our environment spaces and try and share them, it's a really powerful tool to share our story, our vision, with a huge audience that could never come to experience something like that. So in terms of that space that we're going to be filming and interacting with and creating, technology will allow us to share that story in a broad sense across, obviously outside of our country, outside of everywhere. We are limited, but it's an amazing tool. Like, a good example of this is, I was working at BAM for a while, and I met with the Google team that were doing some VR stuff, and they were talking, they just did this quick little VR video underwater, just with blue whales. And so it's a monoscopic, it's a flat space, which means that when you're looking through the goggles, it looks flat, so it looks like you're looking at a screen that's all around you. Stereoscopic mimics both eyes, and so it creates what looks more 3D to the human eye. Monoscopic is more common, and so they did this thing with just someone diving with these whales. I think it was in a developing country, I forget exactly where. So all the kids were putting these goggles on and just like wowing and going crazy. There's one girl in the back that wouldn't put the goggles on. And so she's sitting there, and so they went back and they got a translator to explain, like, it's just, put them on, you can see you go underwater and swim with whales, and she repeated back something in her language, and the instructor said she's scared to swim. So this whole idea is that, like, this technology, especially right now, it is very immersive, and so there's responsibility, partly with it can be very exploitative as well, with emotions of empathy, of fear as well. But we're taking something that is very visceral and trying to record it, and it's very difficult to do. The other side of that is that, I mean, with what you want to create, it's one thing to stand there, and there's a responsibility for us to then take that environment and that space and try and recreate that for an audience outside the territory. I'm really interested to understand how we do that. I have no answers for that. Like that's, there's a lot of R&D to look at that to figure it out, but it is a powerful tool, and I'm really excited to find a way to actually use this to basically create work in the north and share it outside the territory. Yeah.
And work that is not. It's also how does for me, how does art play into that? Because the demo that I've seen is a gold core mining example, right? Because I put on the goggles and I can see their plans over a period of time, and part of that I go like, oh, I can put puppets there, right? So I'm not using it right, but what can art? That's part of, can art be a driver of that R&D rather than just the extractive resources, right? Like there are other ways to use these things, and if we don't step up, they're going to get used one way or another. In this translation of space stuff, Matthew, you've been doing a lot of stuff with binaural recordings, which maybe gets into the stereoscopic, monoscopic question, but for sound, and doing field recordings up here and in spaces. And so what that difference between, because I know you've been going to concert halls and doing binaural, how do we get that sound, and then also like outside, and how do we get that sound?
Right.
So, yeah.
So, by the way, Jayden, binaural audio gets destroyed when it's encoded into the ambisonic 4-channel format. Is that good to know?
We've been talking about that.
Yeah, we've been talking about it. It doesn't work. So binaural recording is something that's been around for a long, long time. It's basically a microphone that looks like a human head. The human head should be an approximation of the average head shape and size, with real pinna and concha and ear canal, and the microphones are in where the ear canal would be. And when you place that somewhere and you record sound, it documents the physics of sound. So we can record it in a simple 2-channel stereo format exactly what's happening in a spherical sense. And when it's experienced on headphones or earphones, it sounds external. Unlike typical stereo music, when you listen to your music on earbuds, everything's kind of like in the middle of your head and right here. The difference when you switch to a binaural recording is like, whoa, you know, and some things that, especially when your brain believes it could be happening, like some creepy dude whispering over your right hand shoulder, it's really, really freaky. Or a door opening, it can really freak you out. So that's been around for a long time, but it's been, and today 85% of people are using earbuds or earphones to listen to music, right? So binaural, the time for binaural should be now, and yet it doesn't seem to be advancing. And a few years ago, I started to contemplate why I thought that was. And one thing that we do in the recording studio when we record music instruments one by one, multi-tracking them and layering them up, is we then treat every layer, whether it's drums, bass, guitar, vocal, differently. We'll pan them to a different position, but we'll also apply a different ambient space around them. So listen to the echo in this room. It's short, but that's called reverb, and that's got some acoustic quality. And so we'll add that to the different elements in a mix. But when you add non-binaural reverb to a binaurally recorded guitar, the three-dimensional sound field starts to collapse because that external data is not in the artificial reverb that we're using in the studio. There's another kind of reverb called convolution reverb. I hope you guys hang in there with me. Which is actually captured in a space. If I come into this space and I have my software generate a sweep tone, so it broadcasts through the speaker a tone through every frequency that we can hear, from the lowest to the highest. It goes, takes a lot longer. But you put the speaker at the pulpit in a cathedral, say, and you put the recording device where the best seats in the theater or the church would be acoustically. And you record that sweep tone. And then the computer looks at it and says, okay, how did every single frequency get changed in here? I'm going to peel that off and create a fingerprint of this acoustic space. And then that's called a convolution reverb impulse response. I can then take that and apply it to that guitar player in the studio and make him sound like he's in this room or the Taj Mahal, if I have those impulse responses. So the thing that I started to wonder about was whether or not, if I used a binaural microphone to record that impulse response, would I be able to then recreate binaural reverb? In other words, an acoustic decay that sounded like it was outside of your head. And if I applied that impulse response to a binaural recording of a guitar player, clearly when I listen to my headphones, that guy's right there, and I add that Taj Mahal, is it going to really blossom out? And lo and behold, it did. Now the trick with binaural recording is everything has to be recorded in positions around the microphone at the time of recording. So if I want, I can't pan it later. So if I want the guitar player here and the vocalist here or up there or down there, I have to do that when I record it. So when I record in all these churches and cathedrals across Europe, as I just finished recently, several places, I record those tones, those sweep tones. I put that speaker in 45-degree positions around the microphone. So then when I record in the studio, if the saxophone player is at 1:30 or 3 o'clock, I pick my 3 o'clock impulse response from, Saint Florian, and I add that to the recording, and I can now create multi-track mixes that have complete three-dimensional acoustic space. And if you close your eyes right now, everybody close your eyes. Oh, close your eyes, do not be afraid. So, it's interesting, right? Why you know where I am at. And the reason you know where I am at is because it takes sound longer to get to your more remote ear as it does to get to the ear that's closer to me. And your head is also creating a shadow frequency. So you're getting darker, less data on the ear that's in shadow from my sound than the other ear. Okay, you can open your eyes. And so that's why binaural is so effective. And I've been passionate about creating this spatial, not just creating it, but also recreating it. So I can go into nature and create record really spacious, beautiful things, from wind whistling through these whistling stones on the coast of Taiwan, or wolves howling in the forest. And when you listen on earphones, they sound like they're out there. But of equal importance, I feel, is being able to multi-track in the studio, go into full studio-style production, and add those ambiances so I don't lose any externality to the entire mix. And the result has been really impressive. The Audio Engineering Society, which is the like the International Medical Association for Doctors, they've published my research recently, and Maclean's magazine just did a story about this. So if you search my name and Maclean's, you can find that. They actually did a better job than I'm doing explaining it. But it's fascinating, and I'm really loving this sense of space in sound and music. It's really cool.
Emily, with Borealis Soul, and just to say for people who maybe don't know, you can do a little bit of intro of Borealis Soul, because when I sent you guys around the thing about what landscape is, I'm also thinking about landscape as the context, like that we often think of it like, oh, it's only the beautiful painting of the landscape, but it's also the people you grew up with and how you relate to them. And one of the things about Borealis Soul that's so amazing is that it's a group of people who like grew up together, and that those dynamics of that landscape of relationships seems so important to the strength of the work, and maybe to your art practice inside of that.
Yeah. So Borealis Soul is a multidisciplinary art collective, and right now we incorporate dance and original choreography and original music, and different levels of technical creation as well. So like last summer's show, we incorporated a lot of visuals and projection mapping. Jayden was involved in that, as well as different set design elements, whereas this year's show is much more theatrical and less technical in nature. So like it really depends on the project that we're doing. But yeah, we all grew up here, and I think that the sort of, we've all noticed that the physical nature of the Yukon kind of being almost like a harsh environment kind of facilitates a sense of community in the way that people connect with each other and rely on each other. And we have all gone through this dance studio at Leaping Feet in Riverdale. So all of the dancers in Borealis Soul trained there, and a lot of them went to school for their dance afterwards and are finished now for the most part. I think I'm one of two that are still in school, and I'm the only one not pursuing the arts in some capacity in school. But yeah, so a lot of our shows have really focused in previous years on how we are impacted by our landscape, mostly in our mental capacities. In 2016, we did a show called Dark, Bold, and Quiet, and it was a series of shorter vignettes that explored how the sort of harsher side of our physical landscape, how we get these endless nights and it's very cold and sometimes very isolating, can affect people's mental health. Yeah, and then that turned the following summer into a show called Blue Hour, which was a very technical heavy one, where we sort of wanted to create more of a story we could communicate with those original ideas. And then with this summer's piece, we almost flipped it around. Most of our shows have been how we're influenced by landscape. This summer was how we influence our landscape. And so it was kind of taking a critical look at how we interact, especially as Northerners, where I feel we have such a privilege to exist in this vast physical landscape, and how sometimes that can be taken a bit for granted, I think.
I can speak of, so after we did that project, I think it was last year, we talked about similar, like using the technology for these guys, because what they're doing is some really amazing stuff, but they don't have a reach outside the territory. And so we talked about how can we use technology within performance to actually start getting a reach and show people not only our landscape but also our artists. And so we talked about changing perspective and how you witness a performance. And so we were actually looking for a space, a terrain to actually build a performance in 360, and then actually projection mapping on the environment itself as it performs. But then your view is in the central. So you're working with, I guess we can't use binaural, but ambisonic sound to really create an immersive dance experience around you, but also being filmed in a northern location, using northern artists and all these things, and northern musicians. We are still pursuing that, but the idea is to use technology to then showcase, obviously, the talents that exist locally, the training that exists locally, in a way that hasn't really been seen. I shouldn't say hasn't been seen, at least in that capacity online, and trying to get Borealis Soul outside the territory using technology. It's still in the works. We're still applying for a yeah, but using, in a similar way, trying to use technology to showcase the world in a good way.
Yeah, and this is interesting question of how to do this non-extractively, right? Like how to both, celebrate and work inside or in relation to land, and and not be part of the like level 2 mining the ground underneath, right? I don't know what the question in that is, but I was thinking also about the community and mental health parts of Emily talking about like the relationship to landscape and creating in it and on it as opposed to just being in it. I don't know that I'm getting towards a clear question, other than I do want you to talk about collage at some point. Yeah. But yeah, I think this. Yeah, how do you feel going forward around these questions of, I have self-consciousness of a guy who's been up here for 2 years going like, we should make theater on the land! Yeah, and so, yeah.
What kind of panel is this?
Yeah. No, that's all of them, yeah. I think these are entangled to me also.
Yeah, I hear that too. That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I guess like the thing for me, and I think the fact that I had this chance to share a little bit about the afterbirth ceremony within a land context, it's just raising really hard questions for me about our people, about our people's future, about climate change gets thrown around like so much is losing its thing, but it's fucking scary. So these are our realities, and our people, my ancestors, know how to be in this place. We sustained ourselves for a long, long time. And we have a value system and a law system that could allow us to be here forever. And unfortunately, with colonization, that is continually under threat. And if our land is under threat, then those practices are also under threat. So that is how I see my relationship to the land, my son's relationship to the land, and the people that I'm in relationship with. And then as an educator, I feel a responsibility to complicate what it means to be here, what it means to live here, what it means to grow up, have a family here, to have a career here. But lots of people are asking themselves that, so I feel like even though it's uncomfortable, there's a lot of willingness to have those kinds of conversations, and art is an incredible way to do that. And I think that it can be used very intentionally to create the desired futures that sustain our way of being, because I think our way of being can save us. So, I don't know, do something with that.
That's all. We wanted to open up some questions from everyone, but also if you guys had questions for each other that have sparked as part of this. Have a moment for that if there are also any questions immediately from other. Yes.
Lianne actually started to answer it, and I think a lot of people would have different answers to the question. But I'm wondering why. So what's the purpose? So, you and Matthew, Jayden and Matthew got into a little bit of the technical side, and that's exciting. It's R&D, and there's interesting pieces there. But if you're not in the Yukon, why would you want to have this, sorry, I forget the wording, this experience that you're trying to convey through maybe sound, maybe visual, are other senses at play? That starts to be another question altogether, but what's the purpose? Why convey this? Why put it out there? And Lianne did start to answer that. So there are maybe political purposes, and certainly at this moment in reconciliation, there's a lot of reasons why people should understand Indigenous relationships to the land, and also because of climate change. There's other reasons there, but maybe there are other reasons that I can't think of. And I can assume, and I have my own, but I'm really curious as to what other people's purposes.
If I could just be, a little bit to what you mentioned, like being political, and that some of your truths is that like some of their knowledge could save us, right? And so there's this idea that there is this small minority in the world that may have some really beautiful things we need to understand, we don't know. So using technology, for me, like listening to what you said, we're working on a project right now about climate change, because it's true. It's so saturated and so diluted that like it has no impact anymore. But for us, I think like right now, because the technology is so new, it has this immersion, this cachet, because it is like when you put it, if you haven't done it yet, the first time I did it, I was like, this is gonna suck. I thought VR, because I remember VR as a kid, that's been a whole joke, and I put it on, and within a second I was painting in 3D, and I was giggling like a little boy again, because I was connected back to Corel Draw as a kid, and I was like, oh my god. And so right now it's a great time to use technology to just get eyeballs into that. And so if we're going to use technology, we should be telling proper, beautiful stories that need to be told, right? And there's not a whole lot of saturation in VR right now, so the chance of us telling the right story, this is the right time. Because people want to digest as much as they can, but right now there's a lot of crap out there. And so if there are messages that are important, I feel like now is the time to get it out there in that platform so people are starting to see it. And the North has a lot of lessons, I think. The whole VR project we're pitching right now for climate change is the fact that what's happening in our backyard, it's happening very aggressively for climate change. And bigger parts of the planet, more dense populated areas, aren't seeing as much change as we are. So the idea is that we want to kind of showcase what's happened in our backyard 50 years ago, where we are today, and then witnessing that in a location like Hong Kong or New York, and basically taking us, using VR, using that technology to actually teleport us 20, 50 years ahead from now, and using science to understand what those cities will look like, and using basically photorealistic VRs to film that location and then take us 50 years in the future. This is, if we don't stop it, this is what New York will look like. Right now is the time to tell the story, because, like I said, because it's such a new technology that the eyes are out there. I met with Google when I was at Banff, and they talked about if you make a crappy 360 project, pretty much the entire community out there is going to watch it. If you make something great, that's when you get this whole new audience out there that hasn't really wanted to experience 360 because there's something that is worthwhile to actually put up those goggles. My whole thing is like, we need to be telling the proper stories, the right things in that environment, and not just a bunch of garbage. And right now, it's saturated with garbage. Like, it really is. There's very few quality projects out there and worthwhile messages being told in that environment. Yeah.
Is this project going to actually physically exist out on the land somewhere?
Like Nakai's thing, or
What you guys are planning?
we're they're involved. This is as far as
I might be missing the.
Right. We are working. I mean, the next 9 days we're hanging out basically around Whitehorse, but also we're going out to Fish Lake and just past Faircross, Conrad, and doing some experimenting. It may end up, part of this is Nakai might end up doing a digital project that is, part of it is if we do a show on Fish Lake that involves somebody canoeing for an hour towards the audience. As a theater director, I just get really into that.
With puppets or without puppets?
With puppets. I feel like puppets and the wind and canoeing is a little bit of a challenge. It's a little bit of a danger.
It's an opportunity.
It's an opportunity. So I had some, like, my sort of art and why questions also involved. Like, I just have an art thing for depth of field. Like, I always liked rooms that were long and narrow and a little bit of like actors passing between them and being able to have multiple focuses. And I like a theater that has, where I can watch the second actor, or I can watch the eagles hang out above the lake for a while and then turn back to the actors, and that's fine. And so that's some of my curiosities. But also there's some pressure to, we'll put on a big show and there'll be a thing that tourists come to every summer. And it's like, I'm not actually sure that there's an economic case for that. And I don't, in terms of authenticity and like what can be made here, that doesn't quite feel right. So this is the beginning of what will be a bunch of experiments around what we do, and that's in some, White Horse and Yukon artists who do stuff on the land, and have continued to do stuff. We're not inventing anything totally radically new, but yeah, this year there's not so much that we're not making performance stuff. We're getting together and a bit talking about how to do the next 3 years and how to organize that stuff. But it's, I mean, for me, just to say on the why, like for me, there's an imagination in a rousing. I'm trying not to use the, like wake up because I don't think it's nice to imply that everyone's sleeping. But to rouse the imagination, to look at the world you talked about, possible futures, to look at the branches on the ground and go like, oh, that's a puppet show. Like that is a dumb example, but is the basic thing that I feel like we need more of in the world, which is people looking at the world and going, oh, there's a possibility of making something together, and that's even more than making something alone. And this is why here is there feels like there's opportunity, and it's those spaces, the wide open spaces are complicated because they're not wide open. They've got thousands and thousands and thousands of millennia of history, and there's something that can only happen here, and that is something that is missing and is hard. Whether it's the closed perspectives of buildings or whatever, but that
I think I'm also curious because you asked the question, which is good.
Yeah.
Will there be a physical
I don't.
installation that people can stand and witness, or is it only digital?
Yeah, because we have some visual artists here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the big one, there's excellence in visual art stuff here. Like
Yeah.
part of this is my desire to work with people who are doing excellent stuff, and there's a lot of excellence in the visual arts in the territory, and to not think and use that would be silly on theater's part. For me, yeah, I mean, I like physical things, and I'm a theater person. I want a group of people in a room. That's the most important thing. I mean, one of the stinky realities of why, and we talk about this, is that it might be easier to fund documentaries about weird plays at this point than it is to fund weird plays.
Are you documenting?
Yeah, I mean, we'll document this,
Yeah.
and we'll start, and we're talking about other ways of funding that aren't based on audience. But there is a weird moment where digital lets me go to, oh, I didn't even do it. Thank you to our sponsors. The Community Development Fund through Economic Development. Right there, like, digital is a key. Digital and innovation are levers that unlock some possibilities right now in government. Possibility in the shape of money. And this thing of how do we share it? If I'm committed to making weird small plays that maybe 15 people see because it's on Keno Hill, then I still have to think about what's the responsibility to share that broader, or to get some access points for people who aren't going to be, in that one spot, in that one time. But also maybe it ends up being that it's more fun to make shows with community, and whether people see them or not doesn't matter. But the act of doing it is the important thing. So we might come out of the 3 years going like, oh, we thought we were going to make a digital product, and actually we made a process for placemaking in communities to get together and play. And that would be, that's a potential outcome that would also be, to me, kind of okay. We don't need to be making a show or a digital product, although both of those things might also be what we're doing.
So we don't know what we're doing.
So we don't know what we're doing, but we're doing it.
How many people are doing
Wrote
it?
John Cage. There are 10 of us as co-designers, plus the Nakai staff. Chatting with these guys, we go up to hang out with Diane Smith tomorrow and visit Fish Lake. And we also, last week, hung out up with Diane Smith and Bureau and the Cape and Recreation, and did a sort of, what might it be if this is we bring a whole bunch of tent scraps, and, not scraps, whole tents that were ripped, and if we bring in a huge amount of supplies and say, let's make puppets and see what a bunch of 10 to 13-year-olds do, and it was me. Like it's a great fun time to play and just like to be silly and making stuff and doing that. Like maybe that tree is a stage, and maybe it's an octopus, maybe like, and to me that's a theater, like that's a clown trick, right? Like the clown trick is like, oh, these objects could be anything, and so that I think helps the world. I mean that's a stupid like we're gonna jam like I think it's better if people spend more time doing that than you know.
Yeah. It's not exactly framed as a question yet, but I have something, I've definitely noticed that about galleries looking around going, huh, look at where all the First Nations people are. And, you know, calling that into question in terms of my own practice, especially as I've been building closer relationships with First Nations communities. I've been doing a collaboration with Teresa Van Chasse over the past couple of years called Scavenging for Many Faces of Raven. And one of the ways that project has worked is we've done shows in galleries, but we've also done a bunch of installations just in people's front yards and other places. And so there's a way that it's not like we know what we're doing either, but it seemed like, you know, even just the process of negotiating what felt comfortable for people in terms of making private places have a public dimension was part of what was interesting about doing that. And as we were installing, Teresa was talking about, I think Peter Moran, who works with the Aboriginal Curatorial Collective, with somebody else whose name I forget. I don't actually know this project, but they did a project called the Bush Gallery, where they were doing installations in the bush, I guess. I don't know exactly what they were doing, but as we were working on the installation on the edge of somebody's front yard, Teresa was saying, you know, they're doing this like it's really revolutionary, but like it's kind of normal. Like what we're doing really isn't that weird, hanging up bits of tire and trees. Like it's not. I mean, it's weird, but it's not that weird here. So I guess what I wanted to offer you was, maybe it might be interesting to look at the Bush Gallery and what they're doing. If you're in this situation, you're looking at that dynamic, and again, to invite you to talk about that a little further, if that twigs anything that you'd like to say.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Makes me think a little bit about this idea of process versus product. And I think just thinking about the work, the making of that, and with some of the pieces, because it was a collective effort, that the project very much was process focused, but I didn't know that. I had to get that loose done, like ready. This might not happen. So the product very much was like the focus, but it's now with the dissertation, looking back and talking to the people who helped and looking at what that meant for them and really thinking very hard about the process part. I think this is the place where we can enact these values that we want. This is the opportunity to say, you know, when our ancestors worked collectively, these are the values that guided how it is that we held space together and did work, right? And we can try, let's try that. Never said that in the whole thing, but things naturally were happening because I know this turned out because of a young woman named Mandy Move, and I was just a bartender too, and I came across Mandy Move, that's her handle, Mandy McDonald.
This weird world where I know people's Facebook accounts, but not their real names.
She does moose hide tanning, and they did a whole bunch of moose hide tanning at the BAM Center, and she talked about everyone was welcome to that, but it was a space that centered Indigenous comfort. And seeing those words together, Indigenous comfort, really helped me because I had been looking at all my data from this making of the art project, going, what was happening here? Because people were both uncomfortable and comfortable. And my sister and I were working very hard to hold space for a couple of other Indigenous participants, young women from living McIntyre, so of this place. And it was hard, and I had lots of other folks, like self-identifying settlers, like different people who are coming in to work on this project also. And like weird things happen because of the racial dynamics and because of this unnamed desire to hold Indigenous comfort at our center. And all of a sudden, people who are not Indigenous were like, whoa, I don't really know how I'm supposed to be here. And that, as a microcosm for this country that we live in, for Turtle Island, that kind of consciousness, I would call it consciousness, not awakening.
Right.
That consciousness shift is I think something so profound. It pushes us beyond, I think, the surfaceness of reconciliation that says just think differently about this. Consciousness raising in that way is saying you have to act different, you have to be here differently, and it's going to be weird. And we don't really know what's going to happen, but you have to stay. We'll stay if you stay, and let's just see what happens. And this was, for us, was happening around the making of a moose, right? Which makes it then, because of the art, this really accessible, sort of like, I'm just here to make a moose, you know, and it's okay if you feel weird here while making a moose.
Right.
Just tell me
We're
what
making a
that-
fluorescent moose.
Yeah, tell me what that was all about later, so I'm excited about it. But yeah, lots there. Just thinking, but there is value in process. Yeah, there's lots of value.
And in that transformation of what is possible in one space being possible in another.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's part
Find a
of
place
that.
to practice,
space.
try something out, create. That's exactly what it's all about.
And you won't always know what it's going to
Yeah.
be. Like, that's one of the great things about that I've noticed about doing lots of mural projects and things over the years. I remember one of the first major mural projects I did in a school. It was in an inner city school in Windsor, Ontario. And I remember the teacher saying, and we were gessoing the canvases. Like, it wasn't anything creative we were making. And the teacher saying to me, wow, it's really great to see that young fellow settling so nicely to the gessoing. It's been really hard for him to settle to anything since his dad was shot in Detroit last year. And it was like, I had no way of knowing, like I couldn't deliberately be doing anything to make a space. Do you know what I mean? I just had to like do the art, and then there's room somewhere, somehow in that for other things to happen which need to happen, which you can't really even know about half the time.
It's emergent.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a word those of us in the group may get tired of me thinking about emergence, but thinking about how to think about emergent practices, you know, at scale, which is hard because it's hard to plan, like how many big backpack rigs do we need? But it's emergent. But like, oh no, we brought all that gear and didn't use it. Like, how do we keep that going when, in fact, my experiences of being on land and in relationship with land is that land's great at teaching emergence. Like, you can't. All my best laid plans, he says, checking the weather, like every 10 minutes for the next 9 days. Like, there is emergence whether I want it or not. I don't have a lot of choice. But how do we set these conditions? I mean, I think that, how do we set some conditions that allow things to emerge interestingly rather than... There's another thing I wanted to say thank you all so much for being part of this. We are moving from here up to Antoinette's. People want to join us. Yeah, thank you so much, Matthew, Emily, Lianne, and Jayden. Thank you so much. And I will say thank you to Yukon for hosting us. Nakai is in residence in this building for the next while, so we're having a lot of our meetings over at Cold Climate Innovation. We're doing some puppets and community build and some stuff at Makespace. And doing these things here at CoSpace, and so it's a great building to be part of, and I do want to say thank you to the Government of Canada for Canadian heritage, and also on a more real basis on the posters. There's a lot of local businesses that have actually helped make these projects happen. And as tired as we all make become of thanking our sponsors all the time, one of the cool things of Whitehorse is that local businesses pitch in on weird art projects. You come and say like, we're doing something on the land, we don't know what it is. And they give us a discount card. So thank you to them, and you can check them out. Thanks very much.